We'll see where that runs.
I have a pop-up message that says streaming destination disconnected.
Yeah, I think we're doing a recording. It is recording with an upload. So worst case, we'll restream it. We'll have to see where this goes. Riverside, not the friendliest UX of platforms we've used, but we're on. We're on. Yeah. Well, Matt, I'm excited to have you on. I want to welcome everybody who's jumped in. This is the Recruiting Community Podcast, and we're really, and I'm Chris Hoyt, so president of CXR. I've got Jerry Crispin, who is the co-founder of Career Crossroads CXR. We're the hosts. Kind of what the idea here is that we're bringing you industry insights and updates in what we hope is the form of a fun conversation. Of course, brought to you by the CXR Career Crossroads community. And today I'm excited. We've got Appcast's Matt Gilbert going to talk on the topic of who sort of decides the value of employer brand. The idea here is really to discuss really gets to define the value of the EB work. Is it the candidates? Is it the employees? Is it the C-suite? And we're going to kind of unpack who holds the power in sort of shaping the EB strategy and how that perception drives measurable impact ideally for the business. A couple things first before we jump in. We're streaming on all the socials, maybe. YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, on Twitch, that sort of thing. If you do happen to be seeing this in the stream and you're on LinkedIn, there's a little chat window there or comments. You can add those. If you've got questions for Matt or for Jerry and I, you can add those. We'll go ahead and chime in and see if we can get back to you as quickly as we can. You can check out cxr.work/podcast for past and future episodes. And as a quick reminder, this is an ad-free labor of love. So we're on episode. Jerry, we're creeping up, believe it or not, to episode 500. But nobody has paid to be on the show. So we brought in folks who are doing cool stuff, doing cool work. They've got cool opinions. We want to hear those. Did I miss anything, Jerry?
No, you got it all.
Thanks. I think Matt. I think sometimes I miss it. And Jerry goes, "Nah, it's fine."
Like an old married couple. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Well, Matt, I mentioned you're from Appcast, but you want to give us a little bit of history. I mean, you were Bayard before that. I mean, kind of give us the escalator pitch. Like, who's Matt Gilbert? And why should we be listening to you today?
Happy to. So, Chris, Jerry, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Yeah, Matthew Gilbert. Right now, I'm the Vice President of Employer Brand Strategy at Appcast. And about a year and a half ago, Appcast and Bayard merged. Appcast acquired Bayard. We had been working with Appcast for over a decade. We were involved with Appcast at the very beginning of programmatic, and being partners for so long, at some point it made sense to put the two organizations together. We expanded each other's capabilities. I had joined Bayard in 2004. And it's an interesting story because I have a good friend and colleague who was working at Bayard, and I was working in what would be considered corporate brand design and consulting, Siegel and Gale, and calls me up one day and says, "The creative director at Bayard quit. Would you be interested?" And I just hung up on him. And then he called me back a couple of times. It's like, "Remember all that stuff you talked about intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship for creatives and designers, that stuff you studied in your graduate program? You can do that here." Eventually browbeat me enough to come in, had an interview. Almost didn't get the job because I have a low voice. I'm a low talker. And our president at the time thought that low talking would be an impediment to interacting with clients. So we were able to convince that person to give me a shot. And I was there for well over 20 years. And it's been an enormous, enormous ride. I mean, one of the things that I love the most about being in this area is the altruism. I'm using all of the backgrounds and tools of creative marketing, branding, to help people find jobs. And I find that very, very rewarding. And it's kept me inspired ever since.
I love it. So let's jump right in, right? I mean, the topic here is like who's kind of really in control of employer brand perception today. So what's your take, Matthew? Is it leadership? Is it employees? Is it candidates? Or is that something maybe that's constantly in motion? Is it always changing? Does it depend on the brand? Talk to me.
And this is a really, really great question. It's super topical. I mean, this is an ongoing debate and probably has been since the mid-1990s when Simon Barrow first decided to call this thing employer branding. And it's an essential question too, because control is the operative word. Control meaning who steers it, who runs it, who develops it, who executes it, who implements it, who measures it, and so forth. And the answer that nobody likes is all of us, everyone, but not equally and not always the same ways. And that creates a little bit of chafe sometimes internally with organizations. I've probably worked on well over 350 employer brand programs since we started our practice in 2004. So that gives me a lot of landscape to look at different organizations and different industries and different stages. Lots of candidates, lots of job seekers, lots of employee interviews and surveys. And the part that I think helps the most is less who question and where. And what do we want these things to do for our organizations is probably I wish people spent more time thinking about not so much who should own it. Should it sit in marketing? Should it sit with a C-suite? Should it sit in TA? Should it sit in HR? Should it sit with employees? Should it sit with job seekers? Should we ask them what they think about all these kinds of things? And the answer is all of the above. And the way we do that is through the lens of our favorite word, value. So what is the value of employer brand to a candidate job seeker? We could do a laundry list of things that are valuable to them. And what is valuable to an employee? They're living the experience. So for them, it is sort of it is their reality. It is their day to day. And then we have C-suites who pay for everything. And that's where budgets come from. And we need buy-in from them. And they have strategic objectives and they have workforce objectives. And all of those things have to somehow kind of happily find themselves in the same apartment living together. And when they're not all living together well, like somebody didn't do the dishes and somebody doesn't make the bed, that's when we find we have challenges. But ultimately, all of us, everyone inside an organization is a stakeholder in this, but unequally and in different ways and different parts of priorities and what they work on and so forth. And to ignore or misalign any one of those three is, do it so at your own peril. And we've seen that time and time again, what happens when there's a lot of misalignment or disagreement or fiefdoms or turf wars and things like that.
Yeah, we do. I mean, the topic does come up, and I would say more so in the last, and Jerry, you got to keep me honest, I think in the last 4 months or so, we've had more leaders kind of really rethinking where the employer brand or the recruitment marketing team sort of sits and reports into. Should it stay dotted line to them? Should it move over to a comms or to a marketing arm, that kind of thing? And I think what that says to me, it really is about a power dynamic. And kind of where the power dynamic lies and kind of what the companies are or how the companies are sort of managing that. And I think you kind of hit on it, Matthew, when you're talking about the metrics. So if you think that's a driver by company, because I don't know. Well, let me start by this. Do you think there's a right or wrong, or do you think it really is determined by the organization and the organizational leadership?
So, they're definitely a stakeholder, and I'm treading on a tightrope here with that question. So I don't want to, because right and wrong are words that we try not to use. We try to do effective, not as effective, so that we stay. Yeah. There's a C-suite version of value proposition. There's a C-suite version of employer brand. And then there's everybody else's version of those things, especially employees who live it on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes those things are a little bit far removed. A great example of that is when an organization redoes mission, vision, values. And that's often done at a very high level in a company. Maybe there's some work done, some talking with employees or stakeholders in different areas and getting inputs on these types of things. But quite often the C-suite that is overseeing that work or the teams together are quite removed from day-to-day realities of working in an assembly line, working in a manufacturing facility, working in an engineering team, and so forth. So because of that, the more effective approach, which is probably to say your version of wrong without labeling anyone, the more effective approach is a holistic version of that. Keep your C-suite versions of those things. Recognize that they're going to be high level. Like the way we would sometimes describe it is, your organization is doing a parade down the street. The flag in front is the C-suite version. If you walk up to everyone walking in the parade and ask them what their version is, their experience of value, their perceptions of value, their strategic, how they measure value in their own scorecards or checklists in their day-to-day, they'll probably be very different looking and sounding than the flag that's in front of the organization that's walking down there. They're not wrong. Neither one are wrong. They're just when to use them, where to use them, what effect do we want to have.
Yeah, that's I think that's a really apt description from that perspective. It occurs to me from Chris's point of view that in the last few years, folks stakeholders internal who are responsible for employer brand are much more mature and experienced than 5, 10, 15 years ago, where employer brand was kind of an external discussion with experts, if you will, and increasingly we started populating internally folks who were responsible for that. And I think they've gotten to a point where they're, if not at the table, they are trying to influence those who are.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's such an interesting conversation because I have so many of them through a combination of tools that we do when we're working with someone, surveys, focus groups, workshops, those types of things, roundtables. And it's always starkly different in the field than above the field. How many floors up you go, the view changes, the atmosphere changes, the temperature changes, all of that. And the closer those things are connected and together, the clearer an organization can talk about value. And ultimately, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, man. I'm just wondering. So I love the parade analogy. I also love that anybody, no matter how far back in the parade they may be, probably is still aware of what's on the guidon, right? That front flag out front, they can tell you what's up there.
Yeah.
Across the board. I guess that kind of brings me to a question of metrics or signals. Are there any that you believe are particularly potent with regards to maybe sort of proving the value of an EB strategy? So not necessarily who wrote, right? Who decided what those would be, or who decided which ones in an organization matter or align to the business. But are there metrics or signals you kind of believe actually prove the EB better than others?
There are, but they're difficult. So it's the old adage, like just because something's hard to measure doesn't mean it's not important and not relevant. And the true impact of all of the facets of an employer brand program are challenging to measure to the one holy grail metric, which I've heard this my entire career. If we invest X in employer brand, what is the return? Does it improve our share value? Does it improve our go-to-market speed? Does it improve our collaboration? Does it improve our innovation? Does it improve our inclusion? And the answer to all of those things is yes, it can. Very hard to get a solid line between them, but we have developed ways to infer those things. And the analogy is sports teams. Doesn't matter what team. So if you think of a sports team that's not doing well, it's much harder for them to recruit great players. It's harder for them to recruit great managers. It's harder for them to sell more tickets. It's harder for them to sell more T-shirts and hats and merchandise and fill stadiums. And the television networks don't really want to have them on the prime time. Now you take a team that's doing really well. And they don't have to win the championship. They just have to be playing well. All of a sudden, all of those things get easier for them. The top talent wants to play on that team because it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. People who are kind of like real passionate go-getters want to work with people who are equally kind of, of that same ilk. It's also easier for them to sell T-shirts. And now all of a sudden the networks want them on prime time. So they get more exposure. They get more access to opportunity. You get a lot more people become advocates or ambassadors, however we look at those, voluntarily, as opposed to having to knock on doors and ask them to it. So the metrics that we can kind of start to pull together, and this is why I think it's hard, because the hard data, time to fill, those types of things, retention, some variation of measuring engagement, we're measuring emotion, and that's what's so hard. It's really tough to measure emotion, but you can do it. We have to ask qualitative questions. We have to ask people what signals determine whether an employer is a high quality employer. And then that creates kind of a scorecard, if you will, of like what's on everybody's list. Like what's a high quality employer to you, Chris, or to you, Jerry? And then we go around that parade, all those thousands of people behind the flag, and ask them, what is a high quality employer? What is not a high quality employer? most people are going to kind of, be pretty centralized in a lot of things. And then you have your kind of your outliers or things like, I must sit next to a window because I have seasonally affected disorder. And if they let me sit next to a window, that's a high quality employer for me. For others, it might be more tangible, comp, benefits, mobility, those kind of things. But by asking those questions, we can start to see whether or not that sports team is doing well and winning, and then it's starting to attract more. Now, in the trenches, what that looks like is probably a survey, always on. Ask people generally around the time they're hired or when they start, because they're more motivated to do that instead of 6 years after. But you can do it then too, and then you start to now you have a moving average. You can say, okay, we started at this, and we did all these things. And we improved our time to fill, and we improved our TA metrics, and we reduced our cost for this or that and so forth. But look at what we're seeing happen by asking qualitative questions, like how inspired were you by the video that you saw? How engaged were you by the content that you read or engaged with? And that's measuring emotion. So you have to go about that in the ways we would measure emotion. And who's really good at that is the sociologists of the world. Your Adam Grants, your Malcolm Gladwell types, your Daniel Kahneman types. They're really good at kind of filtering noise and getting to what people really feel and believe. Because career decisions are, this is my opinion, just my opinion. I think it's 20% practical, 80% emotional. Maybe I'm wrong I'm sure that's not true for every single person. You offer them an enormous salary and woo, that just threw that out the window. But I think emotion plays a much, much bigger part in it. And predicting emotions is super tough. And measuring them is even harder.
And obviously the key is being able to tie some measure of those emotions to the performance of the organization over time. That the motivation of the people doing the work is such that they accomplish more toward a common goal of the products, the quality of those products, et cetera, and that over time that works. It's just hard dealing with all the variables that could be affecting that.
Yeah, it's a soup for sure, and it's trying to get the little alphabet noodles out of the soup with a spoon is tricky. One of the things that's really interesting though is it depends on your start point, and this isn't easy stuff to do, and it requires some partnership with your finances groups and your accounting teams and some other teams. But if you take a baseline of a company, and let's say I'll say it's a public company just because it's easier. So they have a share price that's published every day all over different news organizations and so forth. You do all these employer brand things, and you keep track of when you started and when you implemented, and you're doing your qualitative and you're getting your other metrics, and then you're starting to see something change. So we can't fully take every attribute because there's all kinds of other things going on. But if we're starting to see greater collaboration, there's going to be, so wherever there's a high degree of engagement, there's generally a high degree of productivity. This has been kind of studied historically. So we should start to see some measure. Now, share price is a little bit tricky because, that's influenced by things outside of what the company's doing. But we should see better collaboration. We should see some faster time to market. We should see more innovation. We should absolutely see more sharing of resources and information. Like all of those things start to become measurable because now we're looking for it as opposed to just looking for the things that are easier to track. Time to fill is easier to track. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you call it a couple of really interesting things there, Matthew. With regards to there's an alignment of what the messaging should be that you've actually insinuated is a go, right? That's already been done. But oftentimes, and we hear from folks all the time talking about how they have created a message that was the message they were told to deliver, the brand they were told to deliver kind of came down from on high. And it didn't necessarily align with kind of what the organization thought, or they didn't do enough homework to figure out if it did or if it didn't. And you work with a lot of organizations, so that kind of tees us up. I mean, let me ask you, how do you handle situations where like the internal perception or the elevated perception, right, of the brand doesn't match what candidates or employees experience?
That is such a great question. It is a great question because there is no organization that we've ever come across that doesn't have some degree of that. It's just the vagaries, the reality of, again, coming back to some emotions. Like, you had a perception set, you had an expectation based off of all the things that you encountered and experienced and so forth. And we don't know how accurate that expectation was set unless we ask, right? So all those expectations get set, and then all of a sudden someone finds themselves in a team or a department or an area, and for some reason that expectation doesn't feel like it was fully accurate, but they stick it out. They stick it out for a few months. We've all done this. You're like, I don't know if this is right, man, but gosh, it's so hard to find another job, and it's so disruptive for my life and my family. I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to stick it out for a year. I'll give it a year. See if it gets better. But the employee also has a part to play, because it gets better if their I'll use the word attitude, you can call it mindset. If their mindset is so that they want it to get better, and they take steps and actions and behaviors and do certain things, it can get better, independent whatever expectations were set. Now, so it's kind of an altruism between the employer and the employee, where it's like, okay, we both set each other's expectations. Someone came in for an interview and said they're great at this, this, and this, and did the skill test. Then they start, and they had all these expectations based off of the TikTok videos that they saw, that they're going to be dancing in the aisles, and it's really not like that. And, okay, there's a lot more bureaucracy than they thought based off of what they read on a career site. And, but they're so motivated, willing to try to make it work, to give it its absolute best. And then they see that their employer, their manager, usually is the person that, or leader, is kind of in that, really encouraging them to take on responsibility, gives them opportunities to grow. It's really good at team connection and team building. And all of a sudden it changes from my expectations not met, so to the other one. So the recipe, I guess, for addressing that is a little bit of humble pie. Like, let's be honest with each other first before we start going out there, because authenticity is sort of relative. Two people work in the same area, one loves it, one hates it. Which one is authentic? They're both authentic. So the difference between that is sincerity and honesty, which is being able to give some insight where you need to be, because it doesn't help anyone to overcook it, to hype it up too much, like it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then that's where you get into your worst case scenarios, where the lived experience, the real version of it, is so out of account to what they thought. And then everyone's miserable, and you want to find out how miserable people are, go on Reddit and ask, because Reddit is really raw, and Reddit will tell you, the Reddit community will give it to you, straight, like a bullet.
Well,
so great at
creating slightly twisted, for sure.
Yeah.
What I love about what you're talking about, it seems to me that there's a moving target around transparency. We are increasing the level of transparency that employees and candidates have to cope with. Years ago, you would not have asked about pay. You would be waiting for the company to kind of tell you what they're going to pay you. And in fact, as an employee, sharing how much you make was tantamount to getting fired.
Yeah.
And that has all changed. And on a number of variables, you see that progress in terms of, now we have a lot more data, and we have to defend the data. So that transparency requires upskilling, I think, everybody, from the hiring manager to the recruiter, and the candidate's capability of understanding that. So I'm fascinated by that shift.
Yeah, I might argue with that real, sort of Matthew's point, like this real transparency, like take the arrogance aside, it takes time.
Yeah.
I think if you're at a bigger organization, just saying, hey, we took a sample of 100 employees, and bam, here's our brand. Like, it takes time to go through the ranks for all tenures, right? And all levels and all markets, and pull something together that really is a true reflection of your organization. And then to figure out what you want to double down on that from your findings, and then maybe even a couple of those, items or a couple of those findings you want to pick up and go work on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, imagine if when communicating to people externally, so this is the recruiting attraction side, we were able to not only give them the kind of like the cheerleading version of those things, but also we want to level set. We want to expectation set with whoever is out there reading these things. And there's some hard days. So here's an example of that. Like, this is the work ethic that we have seen really do well here. This is the kind of attitude that really does well here. This is the kind of perseverance mindset that really does well in these roles. And then a little bit of the, and because you're willing to dive into this cold plunge that we call this new job, in return, we're going to be out there with the towel to warm you up, and we're going to give you the certain things. Like a great example of this where I just see so much disconnect is around the topic of mobility, because it's so valuable for people in their career to have that, to be able to raise their hand and say, I've really always wanted to try doing this. My hand is raised. Can I go do that? Most of the time, the answer is no, not exactly. Because anyone who's a manager and has someone that's raised their hand and says, want to leave, is about to lose someone who's probably very, very good at their job. So they're going to like hold on with both arms and try to keep that person. And then it becomes complicated because the other department, group, team, project, et cetera, has to be willing and open to have someone that now is a transferable skill because that person hasn't been doing it. And then you get into this incredible mishmash. So like, imagine if we could get mobility right. Imagine if we could do that really well, where somebody could, as simple as just raise their hand, go onto form, go into their, the internal instance of an ATS and say, I really want to try this job, but I'm half a year's skills away from truly being qualified for it. Is there a program that I can do internally? Can I shadow? Can I do this? Can I get trained up or skilled up to do this? And you help me. I'll do the work. Will you help me get to that? That is a gold rush for an organization that can kind of figure that out. And imagine doing this at a company that's 100,000 people. That's so complex to make that work across different time zones and teams and departments. But that is an area where we see so much of the lived experience not matching up to the expectation. There's a lot of content talking about mobility and all those kinds of things and growth and learning and development that doesn't really generally live up to the expectation that's as simple as raise your hand and you get to do another job.
Yeah, I find that it's a constant reminder that it is okay to show warts. Right. So the research that comes back, I mean, it is okay to repel some with a bit of honesty around. We're not a 40-hour work week. We're a 50-hour work week. And we make up for that over here, but we lean all in here. And if that's not a fit for you, great. Right. It's like when Jamie Dimon takes this stance and says, you're going to be in the office, or you're going to find somewhere else to work. Like you can get upset about that all you like. That just means you don't want to go work for Jamie Dimon. Right? But there will be people that will speak to, that will really resonate with and go in. And I just love when we see folks kind of double down on that messaging and say, here's what it is, here's what it isn't. Talk to us if you're interested.
Yeah, spot on. But part of the challenge is like, here's what it is in the present. We don't really know what it's going to be like in the future. Yeah. So we invite you into our weird and wacky world. This is what it roughly looks like. This is what we think is going to have happen in the near future, right? Who can predict too far out? Are you willing to take this journey? Are you willing to get on this roller coaster ride with us? And if so, here are some things that you should really know in advance. I mean, I don't love I know it's kind of in practice, repelling someone is like saying no, but more like, we're going to invite you in. And if we could, as companies and organizations, be able to bring someone in. Imagine you could bring someone in for 2 weeks to shadow. Gosh, what that would do to change things. Like it would let them try before they buy, which I haven't seen good versions of that yet, except for things like part-time and, fractional a little bit. But that would be an ideal way to get most of the problem out of the way. Like, here, we're going to let you do this for 2 weeks. Now you have to be unemployed, because if you're already employed, you can't go tell your employer, hey, listen, I'm going to go work at this other company for 2 weeks to see if it's a good place that I want to work at.
I just need just a little bit of time off.
Yeah, and then you become unemployed right away once you tell them you're about to do that.
Matthew, let me ask you, from your perspective and the work you guys are doing at Appcast, are there any, like, what are companies getting what are companies getting right about who they're kind of building that employer brand for? Are there any examples you kind of put out there in terms of like process and the methodology, the approach? You don't have to name the company necessarily, but is it what are folks getting right about how they're building that brand out?
I see a lot more attention to holistic thinking. I didn't see that 5 years ago. I didn't see that 10 years ago, of thinking as an organization as a whole, and that your group team is part of a whole, just a part. So we can focus on that team, localize the experiences and all those kinds of things. And what is a micro value proposition? And that's definitely a step in the right direction, is to have things be more holistic. Most people, I'm just going to, from the external point of view, people engaged in job search, there's a pretty predictable pattern. They're going to search along the lines of their career path, what they've done before or what they've studied. So that's fairly predictable. So imagine value proposition to that person is not so much the C-suite version. It is what is the things that I can touch and taste along the lines of that career path journey that I'm already on. And if I'm changing that career path, is there any way that you can kind of show me that? So that's the holistic approach, is I see this more and more coming from TA, coming from some partnerships with marketing, thinking that, okay, it's not just marketing, it's not just talent attraction. The attraction part is also better for us when we do it as a combination of these things. A little bit of transparency, a little bit of honesty, a little bit of authenticity, a little bit of sincerity, all kind of wrapped together. And when we think about it along career paths, not so much individual, but kind of aggregate career paths. If someone's going to be a physician, that's a career path. If someone's going to be a nurse, that's a career path. If someone's going to work in retail, it might not be a full career path for them, but it is for a while. So make that the most holistically, and where all these different parts of an organization can either add value, even if it's just 1%. All these different places that you can add value, 1%, 2%, 1%, starts to ladder up for that person. And you're going to get a better qualified applicant. You're going to get a better qualified interviewer. You're going to get a better qualified employee. And that kind of raises all of the ships within the holistic. Because if you can get a team that can do this really well, then you can scale that. And then you can become a model for another group that says, hey, we're going to think along the lines of someone's career path. Not just like kind of a narrative and a slogan and a bunch of pillars. Those are great. That's the flag in front of the parade. And then we're going to kind of really ask people some good questions around, like, what is a quality employer along this career path? What are the things that really matter in that respect? We know you want comp and benefits and those everybody wants those things. Where do you want them? When do you want them? How do you want that delivered to you? If we can start to get into that's part of that holistic thinking, is thinking that you're part of a system. Even if you don't think you are or feel like it is every day, you are still part of a system, and that system is working for you in ways that you can't see it. So make some of those invisible things more visible.
Yeah, what I really like about that is that type of VB work seems to me that it will have legs much longer than anything that comes from a little bit more of a shallow base. You have more to pull from for that. You've got more longevity with that, and if you're leaning in to these other components you've identified along the way, like doubling down on internal mobility, like you're just creating more track, out in front of the teams, and I just love it.
Oh yeah, imagine if an organization could improve the process, the function of the operations of mobility 5%. What that would do for their retention, their engagement, their productivity, their innovation, their collaboration. Because anytime someone moves from one area to another, they bring with them all of that knowledge, all of that experience. So now everybody improves from that experience. It's, easy to say, a little harder to do. I get that,
It takes time. It isn't always good. A game like this, I think speed isn't always the metric you got to really double down on.
I look at it like this. If we can figure out a way to make generative AI answer any question I possibly can imagine, train it on the entire world's knowledge, can we figure out how to make mobility work a little easier and better? There's got to be, Yeah.
Well, look, Matthew, we asked this question to everybody before we wrap it up. A little bit of a trick question for you, but if you were going to write a book on this topic of kind of ownership and who should own this, who should run this piece, like, what would you title that book?
I think I would title it The Art and Science of Storytelling, because I look at everything as storytelling. Marketing is storytelling. Product invention is storytelling. TA is storytelling. HR is storytelling. We're all with Shakespeare's, we're all each another as audience. And I don't mean storytelling and they make me cry, make me laugh, but why not? Once upon a time, there was an organization, and that's how the book would begin, which is The Art and Science of Storytelling.
I love it. Well, Matt, who gets present company excluded? Who gets the first signed copy?
Oh, that's a list. So I think I would be in the doghouse if I didn't sign it over to my wife and put some kind of acknowledgement that she's put up with me for the last 20 years as I obsess over how people make decisions about careers.
I love it. Well, it's kind of funny. It seems to me pre-pandemic, everybody was like, oh, this random person, oh, that. And then after the pandemic, it's like, whoever survived with me in the house for that period.
You're exactly right on that.
Love it.
I love it. Matt, man, thank you so much for joining us. We know you're super busy, so much gratitude for you cutting out the time to chat with Jerry and I for a little bit. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you guys both so much for having me on. This was great.
Yeah. Always great to see you. For everybody who dialed in at cxr.works/podcast, you can check out what's ahead. And we'll remind you to hit the subscribe and all the buttons. Just hit all the buttons where it's this way. That'd be great. It'd be good for everybody. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in a week.
Thanks for listening to the Recruiting Community Podcast, where talent acquisition leaders connect, learn, and grow together. Be sure to visit cxr.works/podcast to explore past episodes, see what's coming up next, and find out how you can join the conversation. Whether you've got insights to share or want to be a guest on the show, we'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a member of the CXR community, visit us at www.cxr.works. We'll catch you in the next episode.